Welcome to our session today on counseling, how to make it work. One of the most concerning things for a supervisor or manager is the time when they know that they have to counsel an employee. And the question arises, how do I do it? What do I say? What do I do? Should I even confront the situation? And am I going to run into legal troubles? Is it really worth all the effort? And I'm going to show you today a few things that will give you confidence as you approach the counseling situation. And to start out with, I want to talk about what the goal of counseling is. The primary goal of counseling is for an employee to clearly understand how they can successfully do their job. Now you think about it. Isn't that what you really want? You want your employee to perform the way you expect them to perform. And chances are the reason why you're talking with them today is because they have not done what you expected them to do. And your employee, from their standpoint, they want to know what's expected of them. Hopefully, and we'll get into this further on in the training, hopefully you've taken the time to train them appropriately, and I'm going to show you how to determine for sure if you've done that. The goal of counseling is not to assess blame. You're wrong, you're stupid, you didn't do it right. That is not the point of counseling. Now, we are going to explain their behavior, but we're not going to assess blame, and there's a difference there. Blame is when you talk about the person, and simply pointing out a person's actions is talking about the behavior, and there is a huge difference. You can really tell the difference if you're on the receiving end. If someone starts talking personally, then you're going to get defensive, you're going to get angry, you're going to want to retaliate, and it's just not a good scenario at all. But if you talk about what a person has done, just about their actions, then there is no reason to be defensive. Now, sure, the person may have some justification as to why they did what they did, but there's not going to be that same fiery response as if you're attacking them on a personal level. It is not to humiliate them. We don't want to shame people. We don't want them to feel badly just for the sake of feeling badly. We don't want to exact some form of vengeance on them because they messed up, and we want to make sure that they feel discomfort over it. We don't want to vent anger. Nothing good happens when you talk with an employee while you're angry. It's best to settle down a little bit, get control of your emotions, and then go ahead and talk with the employee. It's the same thing in parenting. I mean, we've been on the receiving end of well thought out discipline, hopefully, and we've also been on the receiving end of angry discipline. And I'm sure that we appreciate it when our parents, take time and think it through, and then come to us kind of level-headed, and everyone seems to respond better to that kind of scenario. As I mentioned before, we're not going to shame the employee. What's the point of that? Other than some sort of pleasure you derive from seeing another person squirm, another person feel badly. That's just not a good scenario to be in. So that is not the point of counseling. Just to reiterate, the point of counseling is to clearly explain how the employee can successfully do their job. But first things first, remember I said we have to determine whether we've done an adequate job of training the employee. That's only fair, right? If we're going to tell somebody you have not performed up to par, then we have to be honest enough to look at ourselves and say, I gave this person every opportunity to excel at the task that I assigned to them. So here's the things you ask yourself, all right? And you have to be honest. You have to kind of have some intestinal fortitude. You have to have a little bit of, good self-image and so on, a little bit of self-confidence to do this. But here's the things that you ask yourself. Number one, have I clearly explained how to do the task? This is not handing them a sheet of paper saying, hey, read this, walk away, come back, or sign at the bottom, and you're trained. That's not what training is. This is where you explain how to do the task. just as if you were telling somebody how to hit a golf ball or how to cast a lure or how to swing a tennis racket. It's more than just handing a person a piece of paper and saying, read this. It is actually explaining comprehensively how to do the job. Secondly, if you've done that, did you test their knowledge and have it documented? In other words, did you get them to tell you what they've learned? Did you get them to reflect back what it is they heard you say? Because sometimes what you think you explained, the employee did not comprehend in the same way. All right? I've been married now for almost 23 years. Well, I'm in my 23rd year now, and I can tell you in 23 years of that relationship that sometimes what I think I said to my wife is not what she understood. And that's okay. You just have to be a little careful and make sure that the person understands. And so when you're training somebody, you want to make sure that they are tested. And a good way to do that is to ask questions about what you've just explained and see if they can give you the correct answers. And then if that's checked off, then the next thing, and this is the big one, this is where if you want to go from just mediocre to great as a supervisor, as a manager, if you can grab onto this, it's going to really catapult you to new levels of competence. And that is this: observe them doing the task to standard in a peak period. All right, all of those words are important. You observe them. You personally observe them. You watch them do the job correctly. Now, how is an employee going to argue, I didn't know how to do this, if you watch them do it correctly for yourself? And then you document the date and time that you observed them doing it correctly as the final step of their training. That's strong. That's solid. And that shows that you care about the training of your employees. Now, the second part of that answer there is you observe them doing the task to standard. That means that they didn't forget a step. They didn't do it halfway. They actually got this down exactly right, and it was during a peak period. A peak period is the busiest that they're going to be, the most pressure that they're going to experience. You observe them doing the job right in that circumstance. Why during a peak period? Because it's all downhill from there. If they can perform properly during a peak period, then they can perform properly in any period. So those are the three questions. Is it explained? Was it tested? And was it observed? If you got all three of those things going on, then you can go to the next step. But if you said no, and you just honestly say, you know what, no, I didn't do training the way I should have done, then you stop. You stop the process right there. You're not going to counsel a person holding them accountable for something that you never gave them in the first place. You take responsibility and say, this is on me. It's my responsibility to train this person. I'm the supervisor. I'm the manager. I remove barriers to their performance, so I am going to train this person the right way. Even if they've been doing the task for a long time, but they've just been doing it wrong, you've just been getting frustrated, but now you realize, I didn't give them the tools to do the job. You take responsibility. And then you make it right. You train the employee properly. Once and done. I mean, once you have that person properly trained, now you can hold them accountable. And chances are, if you train them properly, you're not going to have a problem. Yeah, you may have a behavior problem, but that's not due to training. That's due to the employee's choices. And that's an entirely different set of circumstances. What I'm saying here is that we're going to remove anything that belongs to us from the disciplinary scenario. We're going to make sure that we've done everything we should do so that we can move on and look at other areas. It's not that you can't afford the time to train. I get a kick out of this when people say, I just don't have time to train people. We got to get this stuff out the door. Really? You don't have time to train your people? I hope that I hope you never have to go to the hospital, but can you imagine hearing your surgeon that's about ready to perform a surgery on you? Man, I wish they had more time to train me how to do this surgery, but I'll just wing it. No, you want that person to be trained, and you're betting on the fact that that person took some time and was trained correctly. And it's the same thing. That small investment of time in training a person to standard is going to reap dividends down the line that you are just going to appreciate a great deal. So if you don't have time to train, you just don't have enough time. You don't have enough time. So if you said yes to those previous questions, that you explained the task, you tested, and then you observed the employee doing this task to standard during a peak period. If you said yes, then you can proceed to step 2. And what's step 2? Progressive discipline. And what is progressive discipline? I'm sure you've heard this term batted around. Well, it is the step-by-step process by which you guide the employee to change their behavior or create sufficient justification to terminate their employment. Do you see where we're going here? It's kind of like the road divides, and one side goes to the person becoming an effective and efficient employee, and the other road goes to some other job. That makes sense, right? You give the person every opportunity, and then if they simply can't or they won't do what's necessary, what the bona fide occupational qualifications of the job are, if they either refuse to or just simply cannot do it, well, you either have to find something else at your place of employment for them to do that they can perform at, or you show them the door. And that's an ethical decision. That's ethical because that takes care of the employee and it takes care of the company, and you can't do any better than that as a supervisor. It doesn't mean you're angry. It doesn't mean you're mad. You don't have to get upset over that. It's reality. It is what it is. So progressive discipline either improves the employee or eliminates them, one of the two. Start out with a talk. I'm not a big fan of just going right to paper and writing everything down, but I'm also not a big fan of people only talking and never writing anything down. I think it's reasonable that if a person, has a minor slip up, that you go and talk to them. And often a word to the wise is sufficient, and they correct their behavior, and enough said. But if you talk to the person once and explain it clearly, you know that they've trained, assuming they've been trained correctly, and then you talk to them and ask them to improve, and they still don't get it, now is the time that you have to document. And the first thing you're going to do is a verbal warning. Now, don't let that trip you up. A verbal warning is written. It is written, but it's classified as a verbal warning. You write it down just to document it, because if you don't document something, then it evaporates, okay? It's as if it never happened at all. So you start with a talk and you explain what you expect, but remember that anything worth talking about is worth writing down. Now, you may not put this on a counseling form, but you may jot it down on a Word document, just a letter for record, something like that, or a memorandum for record, and you write down what you did and what was said and all that kind of good stuff. You could even have the person sign off on that if you wanted to. Even if they didn't want to sign off, you sign off on it and put it in the file. And the reason for that is, if you're anything like me, you're going to forget. You'll at least forget some of the details. And this gives you something to go back to remind you of the specific conversation you had with this one employee. If you've got 20 employees, you're not going to remember each individual conversation. So writing it down is a good thing both for you and for your employee. And then, in case the last point wasn't clear, I hope that you're picking up on this. Document everything. Everything that you do, you document. Why is that? Because if you don't, it didn't happen. That's the simple truth of it. If you don't document it in the eyes of anyone from the outside looking in, if it's unemployment, if it's workers' comp, if it's a lawyer, they're going to look at no documentation as no evidence of anything happening at all. It's your word against theirs. Okay? Now, I don't want you to think that the only reason we document is to nail down things that the person did wrong. We need to document good things as well as not so good things. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you call in the person on their day off and they say, yeah, sure, I'll come in. Hey, they just did you a solid there. They helped you out. So write something down. I mean, it doesn't have to be a paragraph or an essay. Just write down, came in on their day off on such and such a date, sign it, put it in their file. Why do you do that? Because when it comes time for their evaluation, you'll be reminded of the good thing that they did along with the other stuff. See, we have the apparatus for bad behavior. We have counseling forms, we have warning forms, employee warning notices, we have all of that stuff. But where are the compliment forms? Where are the attaboy, attagirl forms? We don't have a whole lot of those, right? We usually save those for awards, banquets, and end of year parties and different things like that. So on an ongoing basis, you really are more fair by including the good things that employee did. All right, so you have a record of it and you can keep track of the good things as well. Why do you document? If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Just like I said, it gives you objective reasons for employment actions. Oh my gosh, as an HR person, we love the word objective. That means that you can measure it. That means that it's a concrete term, all right? It's a concrete reason for an employment action. Whether it's a raise or it's a negative action, like maybe it's a suspension or a termination. Whatever it is, you want to have an objective reason for taking employment actions. And documentation done correctly serves to really bolster your objective reasons for those employment actions. Government agencies use counseling records as proof of warnings. When we do unemployment insurance meetings, we do these formal hearings, like let's say a person disagrees with the award that they're given once they're terminated, like let's say they're denied benefits, and they come back and they say, well, such and such, such and such. One of the first things we do as an HR person is we get the documentation together and we say, okay, here's what we have, boom. And it shows our signature, shows the employee's signature, it shows a record of everything that happened, and that way we have something solid to go on. If we don't have anything, then it's their word against ours, and guess what? Most of the time, when it's their word against ours, it's kind of weighted in their favor. All right. So if you want to help yourself out, help your company out, you want to make sure that we have documentation. We're not trying to be unfair to anybody. We simply want the truth to come out. That's all we want. We just want a truthful representation of what happened, and then let the cards fall where they may. It makes the severity of the behavior known. When you document something, when you write it down, it kind of underscores to the employee, oh, this is serious. I need to fix this. I need to do something about this. It lets the employee know what's expected. And I'll tell you what, a lot of employees simply don't know what you want them to do, and if they don't know, they can't do it. So when you document things, you let them know what is expected of them. It serves as a reference point for improvement. If you counsel somebody in March for lateness, and then next year, March rolls around and you're doing an evaluation and you look and you see this counseling form for lateness, and then you look and all you see are all these wonderful records of coming in on a day off and being on time and great production and stuff, you're going to say as a supervisor, man, you've come a long way. What an improvement. Or you'll say to her, you'll say, wow, you really did something there in March to improve your attendance and being on time. That's just wonderful. And now you have a reason to give them a raise. You have a reason to give them a promotion or to give them more responsibility. So even if it's negative, having that in their file is something on which you can base a reference point for either improvement or a lack of improvement. And then documentation should be done for both good and bad behavior. That we talked about that. It really gets old when the only time you see your supervisor is when you messed up. It's like it's an arm and hammer approach to supervision. And when you mess up, I'm going to clonk you on the head with a hammer. And people don't respond well to that. That's, we don't want to be treated like that. So let's not treat other people in that manner. Let's be fair. If a person does something really good, cool, let's do that. I'm not saying for every single little thing that we're going to put something in their file, but look, let's just be vigilant about putting things in there that reminds us of when a person came in on a day off or did an extraordinarily good job. Maybe they got recognized. Maybe they, did something to improve production. They had a great suggestion, something along those lines we should document. Treat everyone the same. If you're a new or newer supervisor or you're experiencing complaints about favoritism, please listen up to this point. If you counsel one employee for being 5 minutes late, You have to counsel any other employee in that same situation for being 5 minutes late. If you don't, you're going to be labeled as showing favorites. All right? Whatever the reason is, well, the situation, da 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 da. No. If you're going to hold the standard for one person, you hold it for everybody. You play no favorites. Now, if you're starting to feel uncomfortable about a particular set of employees that you work with, and you say, oh man, I can't write them up, we're buds and stuff, you're too close. You are too close to those people. You can't effectively supervise them, and you have to make a choice. You either forfeit your supervisory position, or you realize that you're not one of them anymore. You are now a supervisor, and you have to remain objective, and you cannot play favorites, even if you treat everybody the same. And you treat everybody the same, but you go out to lunch or you go out and you party with these particular members of your team, you're still going to be labeled as favoritism. So not only actual favoritism, but apparent favoritism is undesirable. So you have to remember, you're not one of them anymore. Maybe you were promoted from the ranks and now you're supervising some of the people that you rubbed shoulders with before. Okay, that's life. It's different now. You're people bound by a paycheck. So don't play any favorites. If you walk past a problem, let's say, somebody does something wrong and you don't discipline them, your silence means consent. In other words, in simple language, when you walk by and do nothing, you're saying, that's okay with me. That's okay with me. That's what you're communicating to other employees. The appearance of favoritism can undermine your credibility. We talked about that. If it looks like you're showing favorites, it can get you in trouble. Here's an adage, and this can really help you a lot. When you correct somebody, do it in private. Do it in private. It's nobody else's business. Correct them in private. But if you praise somebody, do it loud and do it in public. Okay? Well, you don't have to be loud, but you know what I mean. You do it publicly because that's something to celebrate. A person did a really good job, celebrate it. But if you correct somebody, you show them the courtesy and the respect of taking them to the office, have a witness. You always want to have a witness, a member of management as a witness. They're not going to say anything. They're just going to witness the interaction and then correct them in private. And I think you'll see a lot better reception to what you have to say. Maintain confidentiality. It's nobody else's business. And set the example. This is a big one. If you say, hey, in our company, there's no such thing as smoke breaks, and your employee sees you out on the curb having a cigarette during your shift, you might as well save your breath, literally. Okay? You might as well just not even say anything because they're going to watch what you do more than what you say. So set the right example, and then at least you'll have the credibility to say, do as I do, instead of do as I say, not as I do. All right? The ones that get the most respect are the ones that lead by example. What are some of the nuts and bolts of counseling? Well, first of all, use a standardized employee warning notice, counseling form, or other document. That way, it'll be complete, it'll be thorough, organized, neat. You don't have to worry about it. So Lions HR has the employee warning notice, and that's available for you. And I understand that is used quite widely. If your company has a counseling form that they use with their HR department, then use that. But make sure that you use an established form. Be thorough and don't rush. This is your job. You're a supervisor. You're a manager. This is what you do. You supervise people. If you're too busy doing something else, you're too busy. This is your job. You are enabling people to do their job effectively. You are guiding and developing a team, and this is an essential part to keeping order and effectiveness in that team. So don't rush it. Make sure it's neat. Make sure that anybody can read it, not just people that know you and know how to interpret your chicken scratch. Use a computerized form for neatness if possible. That's one of the things I like about the Lions HR employee warning notice. You can fill it in electronically, all except for the signature parts. You can't fill that out because it's not for you to type in. You have to sign that, and that just makes sense. Be precise. When I'm talking about precise, here's what I'm talking about. I want you to be accurate. I want you to talk about days, times, locations, full names, actual objective things that were done. I never ever want to see something on a form that says like the employee showed a bad attitude. Well, how did they show bad attitude? What does a bad attitude look like? Well, they folded their arms, they huffed when I talked to. Oh, okay. That's what I want you to write down. So instead of saying the employee showed a bad attitude, you could say when directed to do a task, the employee folded their arms and made a huffing sound. That's something that's measurable. That's something that I can actually take to the bank. So I don't want any ambiguous terms, anything that I can't measure on the counseling form. And don't editorialize. Sometimes we want to get a little bit of a jab in there, when we're doing the counseling. And the counseling form is not the place for that. We don't editorialize. And you want to know something? If you do editorialize, it weakens your case. It weakens your case. Why? Because it's petty. And anybody looking at that is going to see that, you're probably inexperienced, or, you're not approaching the situation in a mature manner. So don't editorialize. Just put in the facts, because simple is beautiful. Simple is beautiful. I'm not saying don't put in enough information. I'm just saying put down the important facts and be done with it. Okay? So, for example, I put down here a phrase about Joe Snuffy, who came in late. And here's what I would put. Under describe the incident or problem in detail, I said, on October 1st, 2014, Joe Snuffy was scheduled to be at work at 10:30 a.m. He arrived at work at 11:10 a.m. He said he didn't hear his alarm and slept in. Period. I mean, that's pretty clear, isn't it? That's all the information I need. I know the date. I know the time he was supposed to be there. I know the time he did arrive. I know what his excuse was. That is a beautiful, simple phrase that I can use. Have a witness. When you are actually giving the counseling to an employee, always have a witness. Why? If the employee says, you know what, I'm not going to sign anything. Sometimes an employee will do this as a jab at you, to somehow get over on you. Well, if I don't sign it, then it's not going to be valid. Well, that's not true. If the employee refuses to sign, you simply write down in their signature block, refuse to sign, and then both you and the witness print and then sign your full names beside where you wrote down refuse to sign. Okay? And that will give solid documentation that the counseling was given. And by the way, it says right at the end of the form that by signing, the person agrees that they have been given this counseling. You give them a copy of the counseling form, and that they've been given an opportunity to discuss it with you. That's it. They're not necessarily saying, yeah, I agree with this counseling when they sign it. Next, be prepared. Have the counseling form ready to go. Don't be writing it in front of the employee. Have it ready to go. Have your thoughts together. Have the witness in the room, present, ready to go. Maintain confidentiality and prevent interruptions. You don't do this in front of a bunch of people. And if you happen to have somebody that controls the flow in and out of your office, say, hey, look, I don't want to be disturbed, or put a do not disturb sign, close the door, lock it, or whatever, but don't allow interruptions. If your cell phone rings, it rings. If your phone rings, it rings. Okay? You are not going to be interrupted during this time. Be respectful in mannerism, tone, and words. If you sit looking, facing away from the employee with your arms crossed, looking off into space and not looking him in the eye, that can look kind of disrespectful, can look a little arrogant, that sort of thing. If your tone is sarcastic, if it's rude, and your words should be professional. You're going to talk to the employee in the same way that you wrote things down on the form. Just be simple. Like, Joe, I'm giving you a written warning because on October 1st, 2014, you were scheduled to be in at 10:30 and you arrived at 11:10 a.m. And remember, you told me that you had overslept. You didn't hear your alarm go off. I've written this down here. I want you to take a look at this, read it, make sure that what I've said is on here. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Give Joe a chance to look it over. And then I would say something like, Joe, if you're willing, would you please sign right here? And more often than not, when given the opportunity and treated respectfully, the employee will sign off on it. Remember, they're not saying I necessarily agree with it. He might write an essay at the end of it saying why he was late and all that. Okay, but don't worry about it. Just this is the way that you do the counseling. Allow the employee to respond and be realistic in your expectations and timeframes. For the improvement and so on. Make sure that you give the person a realistic amount of time to make the improvement so that when a person from the outside looking in looks at it, says, hey, well, that was reasonable. They gave you a week to acquire another alarm clock or whatever was the decision that they made, and they gave you time to improve. Don't get hung up on the signature. Don't get upset if a person refuses to sign. It doesn't matter. You got the witness and your signature. Don't worry about the signature. I want you to, get them to sign it, but if they don't, okay, no reason to get upset. Plan the follow-up and do it. The purpose of counseling was what? Do you remember? It was to explain how the employee can succeed at the job, right? So now you're going to follow up and you're going to revisit this issue and you're going to give feedback to the employee. Tell them when they're doing good. Like the next day, wouldn't it be appropriate when you see Joe walk in the door and he's 5 minutes early, say, hey, Joe, excellent, good job. And you don't have to say in front of everybody, well, look who showed up on time today. No, that's a kick rather than a pat on the back, right? But you can recognize when a person is doing better, and that's going to encourage them to do more in the future, and it also lets them know that you're watching. When you set up the office, of course, don't get between the employee and the door. Sometimes people are going to cry. I know it's a little uncomfortable, but just have a box of Kleenex. I always had a box of Kleenex right next to the seat where people would be. Sometimes people just cry out of frustration. Sometimes people cry because they're ashamed of what they did. Sometimes people cry for some unrelated reason. Just have some Kleenex there. I mean, it's okay if a person cries. That's all right. It's a human emotion, and people are going to cry from time to time. The witness should not participate. If they do, it kind of feels like you're ganging up on the employee. The witness is just there to be seen and not heard, all right? Never, ever, ever touch the employee, particularly in a counseling situation. Make sure that you do your homework. If there is a backstory, investigate it and turn it over to HR. If the employee claims, well, such and such happened, da-da-da-da-da, and they bring up some things that are germane to the counseling that you're giving them, it is incumbent upon you to either turn that over to HR for them to investigate, or to investigate it, get statements, get all your ducks in a row, and then turn it over so that the counseling has the substance that it needs to be substantiated. Remove physical barriers between you and the employee. You shouldn't be looking over a pile of books or around a lamp or something like that. Make sure that you can see eye to eye with the person you're talking with, and make sure if they're seated, you're seated. If they're standing, you're standing. You want to have like a eye to eye contact. Keep your office orderly and professional. It gives you more credibility. Information to include on the counseling form is things like names, dates, times, locations, specific measurable actions that were actually observed and heard by witnesses. If somebody says, well, so-and-so said they heard, no, you're not including that. But if they say, I heard him say, quote, blah, 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 then it's okay. And you have them write a statement to that effect. All witness statements should have 3 signatures. 3. That's yours, the employees, and a witness. Now, when you read the statement before you sign off on it, there may be, and before the employee signs off on it, they may not have answered all the questions that you had. So before they sign, and before the witness signs, before anybody signs it, read through it, and if there's something that hasn't been answered, simply hand it back to the employee and say, hey, I just noticed on this one that the question of where did this happen wasn't really answered. If you know where this happened, would you please write down, where this incident occurred? Don't feed it to them. Just ask them the question and have them put it down, and that way you get a complete statement. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and video's worth 1,000,000. Enough said. So if you're able to have pictures of a situation, or you have a video of a situation, it really bolsters your case. Include signed acknowledgments of handbook receipt, previous warnings, and training pertaining to the off-course behavior. This is just documentation of work that you've done, showing that you have acted fairly and you have tried to rehabilitate this employee so that they would be a productive worker, and they just don't seem to be responding. We covered this. Refusal to sign, don't worry about it. You just write refuse to sign in their signature block with the date, and then you get the witness to print and sign, and you print and sign. A signature means they received a copy of the counseling form, had an opportunity to discuss it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the employee agrees. Give the employee a copy. Make sure that they get a copy. That's important. You file a copy and give a copy to your HR department, and make sure that you treat all these documents as sensitive and confidential. So you don't want to have these in a common area. You don't want to have them left on the desk where anybody can read them. It's nobody's business. You put it into a confidential file, something that can get locked up. And think of who's going to see the form and do it right. Who's going to see the form? Well, unemployment might see the form. The unemployment insurance or workers' comp could see the form, or a lawyer or a judge could see the form. Make sure that you do it right. And be consistent. Really important. If the next day the employee does the same thing, then you counsel them again and you move it up the progressive discipline scale. Doing so shows the employee that you're serious, and it also shows them that they must change immediately in order to keep their job. If you ignore it the next day, remember what I said silence does? Silence indicates consent, or in other words, you're saying, oh, it's okay. Maintaining order also protects your other conscientious employees. You know how if you have a bushel of apples and you have a rotten one in the middle, do the good apples surrounding that rotten one make the rotten one better? No, just the opposite. The rotten one will affect the good ones around it. So I'm not saying that your employee is necessarily a rotten apple, but I'm saying the same effect is going to happen. If you don't handle things as they occur, then it can negatively affect your other more conscientious employees. Don't expect to like it. You're not going to say, whoopee, I get to do a counseling session. It's not like that. It's hard. It doesn't feel good emotionally sometimes to counsel somebody. It can be a little tense. It'll be a little nerve-wracking. That's part of it. Okay, you're in good company. That's just the way it is. Seldom do we really like to confront somebody and talk about off-course behavior. We don't like to have that pressure or a negative experience, or we don't want to see tears and that kind of stuff. But part of being a supervisor, part of being a manager. And don't expect to be liked. If you're wrapped around the axle about being liked by your employees, probably isn't the job for you. Okay, you're not there to be liked. You're there to be respected. You're there to do a job. And so if you're really concerned about being liked, you need to have a talk with yourself about what it really means to be a supervisor. Finally, if there's a termination to be done, if it's not severe enough for immediate termination, then consider the past counseling history and either progress or the lack thereof. Be prepared to defend your decision with solid counseling. If this is the first time and it's not a real severe incident and you just say, I want to fire him, you can do that. Okay, yeah, you can do it. You can also be sued. You can also lose unemployment insurance hearing. You can have a lot of things happen. Okay? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. We're always going to want you to have good documentation, good, solid, objective, fair, consistent documentation, so that if you do make an employment decision, it is defensible. That's another word that us HR types really like, is defensible. Immediate contact with your Lions HR regional manager for advice on next steps prior to taking the action. Talk to us. We're here to help. We want to help you make a solid decision, and we will counsel you in the way that you should go. Remember that no one's irreplaceable. You can always replace somebody. Make sure that you're not held hostage by an employee who is maybe doing their job well, but then is awful to have around the rest of the time because of the way that they treat other people or something along those lines. Consider alternatives. Maybe the person is not performing well because they are assigned to a position where they are not enjoying themselves, or that's not their skill set. Maybe they aren't trained. Maybe their job needs to be narrowed down, or maybe it needs to be enlarged to get them motivated and performing better. These are things that you as a supervisor are responsible for. So before considering termination, you should consider those things. Never hesitate to call your Lions HR regional manager for advice. We're here to help. And please call before you take action. Even if you think that it's absolutely solid, we may know about a law or a situation or something along those lines that could really help you avoid a messy situation. Become familiar with applicable employment law as you interact with your HR manager. You're going to become familiar with certain situations, and you're going to start to be able to answer your own questions. But still, after 7 years, 8 years working with some coworkers, they would come in and they say, Dave, I know what you're going to say, but let me ask it anyways. And sure enough, after they got done explaining things, I said, yep, you're right. That's exactly what I was going to say. But they showed me the respect by coming to me and consulting with me, and that put me on the bottom line where I belong as an HR person. I'm an HR consultant, so that's what we do. We're there to help you make good decisions. Admit it when you don't know. And when you don't know, if you don't know. Now, okay, you might be going cross-eyed on that one. You sometimes aren't aware of certain laws that are on the books, or you may not be aware of certain situations that you have to be cautious about. That's why you call us, because we may know something that you don't. You may not even be aware that you don't know something. Okay? That's what I'm talking about there. Always lean on the experts. Please, give us a call. We're here for you. We want to help.